Hello, hi, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to this new session on British Poetry Second. This class is for the course code ENM 6212. This is particularly for the students who are currently in their Masters of English. And in this particular lecture, we'll be doing block number 2, units 9 and 10, and then we'll be moving forward with block number 3, where we'll be dealing with the unit number 11, 12, and 13. So this is the plan for today's lecture. Let us understand the course structure. So the entire course is divided into 5 different subjects or courses. First one is Fundamentals of Linguistics and ELT. Second is Shakespeare, which I am teaching. Third is Literary Criticism and Theory. Then we have British Poetry, which is this particular class that we are taking right now. And the last one is of British Prose. Now, as per whatever I have discussed, let us delve into the learning objectives or the learning goal for this particular lecture. So in this lecture, we'll be focusing on firstly, we'll talk about The Age of Anxiety, which is a poem written by W.H. Auden, belonging from the Max Ponde group. So this is the poem that we have started in the last lecture, and we have done till section number 4 of The Age of Anxiety, where we have discussed about the different stages. Now we'll be moving forward with that, and we'll move towards the conclusion in terms of section number 5 and 6 of Age of Anxiety. We'll discuss theme, structure, and the modernistic concern which Auden is writing about in the poem. Then we'll examine the contrast between the classical ideas and modern delusionment, right? So how there is a contrast which Auden is depicting in the poem, this Shield of Achilles, where this idea, this narrative has been taken from a classical epic, Iliad, written by Homer. So this entire poem is based on an incident taken up from Iliad. So in this particular poem, the theme is that of classical ideals, but the poem still depicts the modern day delusionment. So this is how we'll be understanding the contrast between the classical ideas and the modern delusionment. Then to understand the major themes such as the stylistic features, the psychological depth with which the famous Victorian writer Robert Browning was writing his dramatic monologues, a literary technique which is famous for a single speaker. So, to analyze the narrative technique, characterization, and themes used in My Last Duchess, which is a dramatic monologue written by Robert Browning, the famous writer from the Victorian age. Now, let us start with, in terms of the objectives, let us just start with The Age of Anxiety, and we'll be discussing the section number 5 and section number 6 of this particular poem by Auden. Right. So, section 5 and 6 of The Age of Anxiety, written by W.H. Auden. So, this sections 5 and 6 from the concluding movement of The Age of Anxiety, where the earlier psychological wandering of the 4 characters. So, we have discussed about the 4 characters: Malin, Quant, Rosetta, and Emblem. These are the 4 characters who are going through their psychological changes, and they are wandering. They reaches a moment of reflection, right? So while they were wandering, while they were having psychological complexities, they finally reaches a moment of reflection. They finally reaches a moment of introspection rather than resolution, right? So instead of having a conclusion, they are reaching towards an introspection. So these sections shift from external dialogue and symbolic journey to inward realization. Earlier we were having the symbolic journey, right? We were talking about the childhood stage, the adulthood stage. So it was all very symbolic in nature. The journey was symbolic. Now we are moving towards the inward realization. What are the changes that are coming within us in terms of the internal aspects, emphasizing the persistent condition of modern anxiety, right? So even if we talk about the modern world, if we talk about the modern anxiety situation, there are no conclusion for it. We can only have a reflection or an introspection in this regard. And that is why in the modern context, resolution is not something which is very prominent. You might have an introspection, you might have a moment of realization, but not a proper conclusion. Now let us move from here. Then the section 5, which is about the return, or basically the awakening, the internal awakening that the four characters are finally having. So in these sections, the characters begin to return from their imagined or symbolic journey. So finally, the four characters that we have discussed, they are returning from their imagination, they are returning from the symbolic journey that they were having to the real world, right? So they go through the entire seven stages of life, which were depicted in Wordsworth's poetry, right? And then we have discussed about that how the seven stages of life that we were discussing in Shakespeare's sonnet, right? Sonnet sequence. The seven stages of life we have discussed. Then they were moving to the another seven stages, which were basically initially it was the seven ages, then the seven stages. Seven ages were taken from the sonnet of Shakespeare, which deals with the journey of human beings right from the birth to the death, right? So these were the seven ages. Then we have moved towards the seven stages, which include desire, temptation, guilt, right? So all these were the seven stages. So these were both these ages and the stages, they were very uh, symbolic in nature, they were imaginative in nature. But now what is happening, all these characters, they are coming back to the reality, and they are having a moment of awakening, they are having a moment of reflection and introspection. Earlier, all these seven stages and seven ages, they were very symbolic, everything was happening in their mind, it was all imaginative. But now they are moving back to the reality, and they are having an awakening, right? So the illusion of escape fades and reality reasserts itself. The earlier quest for meaning, identity, and spiritual fulfillment appears incomplete. So the earlier quest, in which they were trying to understand the meaning of life, they were trying to understand that what is their identity, and they were trying to have a proper spiritual fulfillment, they appears to be completely incomplete in nature. Now the illusion of escapes fade and reality reasserts itself. Character experiences a sense of emptiness and delusionment after coming back to reality. After coming back in terms with reality, all the characters, they are feeling a sense of emptiness, they are in a sense of delusionment, they do not know what is happening, they do not know what is the meaning of life, they do not know what is their true identity. So there is no clear spiritual revelation or fulfillment. So even after going through the seven ages, even after going through the seven symbolic stages, they are not having any clear revelation or fulfillment, right? So there is no fulfillment that is coming in relation to them. Okay, so even after the imaginative and symbolic journey, they are not feeling a sense of fulfillment, and that is why they are in delusion. So the return signifies the failure of modern individuals to find something which is lasting. So the return to reality is actually symbolic, that how the modern individuals are not able to find something which is long lasting, which is permanent, which is having one static meaning. So, what is the key idea that is getting depicted here? The search for certainty in a fragmented modern world remain unresolved. You cannot have a permanent meaning. You cannot have a permanent solution in a fragmented world, because the world in itself is fragmented, right? So you cannot expect uh, to have something which is concrete, you cannot expect something which is whole, you cannot expect something which is permanent. And that is why these characters have to face delusionment, they are not right? So what is the major idea that is getting depicted here? That the search for certainty in a fragmented world remains unresolved, because after the world war, the world was completely fragmented. There was no uniformity, there was no linearity. People were not understanding that what is happening, and they were considering that the entire life is futile. There is no meaning of life. Why are we living if something like this large level of destruction is happening? At any point of time we may die. So what is the meaning of life? Why we are suffering so much? Why we are taking all this pain if we have to die in in such a manner, right? So that is why there was complete delusionment that was happening at that point of time. And because of this particular fragmentation and the lack of linearity and the lack of coherence, the individuals that were living at that point of time, they are not able to find any stable meaning. They are not able to have any fulfillment. They are not able to have uh, pleasure in finding something which might not last for a very long period of time. So that is why they are not able to have any permanent solution for things, and that is why things are remaining unresolved, because they cannot come in terms with a permanent solution because of their fragmented identities. Now, section 6 is the epilogue, the final part. This section moves from individual characters and becomes more philosophical and reflective. The earlier 5 sections were dealing with the 4 characters, but this particular section, which is the epilogue, which is the closing of the poem, it is moving from these individual characters and it is becoming more philosophical and reflective in nature. The focus shifts to a broader commentary on human existence, right? The focus is shifting uh, to a commentary on human existence. Instead of focusing on the 4 characters, it is moving towards a more generalized view of human existence. Auden suggests that anxiety is a defining condition of modern life. So Auden is suggesting that anxiety is a defining, it is basically a characteristic condition of the modern life, because after all the fragmentation, because after all the destruction with which the human community has passed through, it is completely impossible for them to move away from anxiety. Anxiety is something that will stay with them for the longer period of time, and this is one of the reality of the modern age. This is what Auden is speaking in the final epilogue. So there is a subtle movement towards faith, but it is not fully realized. The characters that we get to see, the 4 characters, they are trying to move towards faith, right? They are trying to have some sort of fulfillment, but they are not able to realize that. They are not able to fulfill it in the proper manner. So the poem ends without a traditional resolution emphasizing ambiguity, because modern age is all about ambiguity, complexity, open-ended situation where you do not have a proper closing or a proper conclusion or a proper ending for something. And to follow this particular pattern, Auden is also not providing us with a proper conclusion. There is an open ending of the poem. The poem ends with a without a traditional resolution, which is emphasizing the ambiguity and the complexity of the modern age. Now, the key ideas which are represented over here, that human beings must continue to live with uncertainty. So in these times of uncertainty, in these times of fragmented identity, beings should come in term with their reality, that this is the uncertainty with which they have to live on with. Seeking meaning is an unstable work. You cannot seek meaning in an unstable world, because the world in itself is unstable. So how can you have a stable meaning? You can only have a stable meaning when the world is coherent, when the world is whole, when the world is unified. But the world it's in itself is fragmented at this particular point of time, so you cannot expect to have a unified meaning. So you should rather accept the uncertainty, you should rather accept the non-resolution. This is what he's trying to say, that you should come in terms with the anxiety and avoid seeking fulfillment. Okay, so in the section 5 and 6 of the Age of Anxiety, Auden brings together a set of interrelated themes that define the modern human condition. So in these particular two concluding section, Auden is combining different interrelated themes which are defining the human condition in the post-war era, right? So he is using a lot of symbols, unrelated and interrelated symbols, which helps us in understanding the human condition in the post world war age. So one of the most prominent is persistent anxiety. So in the final section, we have seen that anxiety is something that is going to stay with the people. So people should come in term with it. It is the characteristic feature of the modern age. So as character, despite their symbolic journey, remain caught in a state of existential unease, right? So all the four characters, even after going through the symbolic journey of the seven ages and the seven stages of desire, temptation, they are still in a state of existential crisis. They are still in a state of existential unease, where they are not able to understand that what is the meaning of their existence, what is their identity. So they are still in unease with no clear resolution or no clear fulfillment. This leads to the failure of the modern quest. This leads to the final failure of the modern quest to find your identity and to find a final solution. So, where they search for identity, purpose, and spiritual certainty ultimately proves inconclusive and unfulfilled. Right? So, it is actually proven to be inconclusive because they are not reaching towards a conclusion, and the all the things, all the symbolic journey that they have taken up, it is unfulfilled. Closely tied to this is the tension between reality and illusion. The imagined journey offers a temporary escape. The journey that they were undertaking, it is offering them an escape, but that escape is temporary. It is not permanent. But it collapses when confronted with the harshness of the real world. But that escape is ending as soon as they are getting confronted with their realities and harshness of life. Furthermore, the characters continue to experience isolation and alienation, remaining emotionally and spiritually disconnected from one another and from any stable meaning of sense of meaning, right? So they keep on being alienated and isolated, remaining emotionally unavailable and spiritually disconnected, because of all these things they are not able to find a stable meaning, because they themselves are not stable, they are not emotionally available, they are isolated and alienated. However, amidst this uncertainty, there is a faint suggestion of the possibility of faith. Even in the times of uncertainty, even in the times of unease and fragmented society, there is a possibility of faith, there is a possibility of spirituality. Although not fully realized, it hints a potential path towards meaning, right? So the path towards faith is not fully realized, it might not have a proper conclusion, but still there are hope that you can find some meaning by following this path of faith. Although not fully realized, it hints at a potential path towards meaning, even in a fragmented and unstable world, right? Even in a fragmented and unstable world, if you are trying to seek even a bit of meaning, even half of the meaning, then the only path open for you is the path of faith, right? So there is a possibility that if you keep on following that path, you might come across that truth. So the final conclusion of the section 5 and 6 of the Age of Anxiety encapsulate the essence of modernistic thought, which is uncertain, which is fragmented, and the ongoing search for meaning. There is an ongoing search of meaning. Once we come in terms with one truth, then we feel that this is not the final truth. Then we again move in search of the other truth. So this is how there is an ongoing search for the meaning and truth. Auden deliberately avoids a clear resolution. He is deliberately avoiding a clear resolution because in a society which is itself fragmented and uncertain, how can you have a stable conclusion? Reinforcing the idea that anxiety is a characteristic feature of the modern age, not something to be solved, but a condition to be endured and understood. It is not something that needs a conclusion. It is not something that needs a resolution. It is something that needs to be uh, accustomed with. It is something that you have to endure and understand, because you cannot run away from the reality. You cannot run away from the realistic situation. So you have to come in terms with this reality and this characteristic feature of the modern age. So next up is unit number 10, which deals with the shield of Achilles. So this is another poem written by W.H. Auden, where he reimagines the classical episode from the Iliad. So what is happening? Auden is taking up a very famous epic, the Iliad, written by Homer. So it is a classical epic written in episodic form by the poet Homer. So Auden is taking up a incident from this particular epic, right? Where Thetis is the mother of Achilles, and she is asking the god Hephaestus to form a shield, to make a shield for Achilles, right? So, unlike the richly detailed and harmonious world which is depicted by Homer in the Iliad, Thistis expects to see scenes of ritual beauty, agriculture, and communal joy that reflect order and civilization. So when Thetis is asking the god Hephaestus to make a shield for Achilles, the mother, that is Thetis, she's thinking that the shield will have images of beauty, agricultural, communal joy, which will reflect order and civilization. While to her dismay, what unfolds before her is a starkly different and disturbing vision of the modern world. Contrasting to her expectation, what she actually sees is a unfragmented and uncertain modern world with disturbing visions. She sees a barren, featureless plain populated by faceless, anonymous soldiers waiting mechanically for commands, symbolizing loss of individuality. So what is she seeing? She is seeing a completely barren land. So what does a barren land signifies? That there is complete unproductivity, right? So barren land is symbolizing the unproductivity and the infertility of the modern age, right? So apart from that, there are a group of soldiers, faceless. They do not have a face. This means that they were not having any identity of their own, and they were solely waiting for a command from their commander, from their superior, so that they can act. So they have no individuality, they have no thought process, though they have no decision making power. They are just faceless. And here this faceless thing is symbolic of lack of identity, having lack of decision, decisive power. It is also symbolic that you have no power over your own actions as well, and as well as your thought, right? So instead of seeing harmonious images, instead of seeing uh, lush fertility and crops, what is she seeing? She's seeing barren lands. And the barren lands are filled with soldiers who are faceless, because they are mere puppets in the hand of the commanders. They have no individuality, they have no identity of their own, right? So this is what is depicted, which is completely opposite to what Thetis has imagined. So this is followed by a brutal public execution. So this particular scene, it is followed by a brutal public execution, the execution of a person in public, where a man is killed while the onlookers observe without emotion or moral response. Now what is happening? There is a person who's getting executed in front of the people, in front of the entire crowd, and there is not even a single person who's having remorse. There is not even a single person who's feeling sympathetic, or who's feeling empathetic, or there is no sort of emotion that the public is showing. So this further shows that the modern world has turned emotionless. There are no empathy that people are having, there is no emotion that they are having for the other person. So another scene depicts a group of boys engaging in purposeless violence. Then there is another scene where there are a group of boys, and they are engaging in violence which is purposeless. There is no reason behind their action. So they are completely indulging into violence, but there is no reason. So there is no proper reason for which they are indulging into this violence. So this simply means that the society is completely meaningless. You do not need any reason or logic to act. You are just acting for the sake of it, and there is no logic behind it. So you have no purpose. This is also reflective of the idea that you have no purpose in the modern world. You are mere spectators, or you are mere followers of people, right? uh, Thetis is left horrified. Thetis, the mother of Achilles, she's completely horrified after seeing such images, because she was expecting all things to be full of beauty, or of depicting communal joy, harmonious, depicting harmonious civilization. But instead, she's seeing all these horrified images and realizing that the world awaiting her son is one devoid of meaning, compassion, and moral structure. So after seeing these images, she's finally realizing that instead of a harmonious civilization, instead of communal joy, the world that is going to come in front of the sun is not that of harmony. It is rather devoid of any meaning, devoid of compassion, and devoid of any moral structure, because people are taking action without any purpose. People are doing things without any reason, right? They are indulging into violence without having a purpose. So the major themes that are depicted in this particular poem, the poem powerfully explores the contrast between classical ideas and modern reality. So the shield of Achilles, which is based on an incident taken up from the Iliad by Homer. So Iliad is an epic. It is a very magnificent poem written by Homer, which depicts the harmonious civilization. But what is Auden doing here? Auden has taken that classical theme, and he's depicting the modern delusionment using that theme. Right, so he's taking an incident from the classic epic, and then he is contrasting it with the modern age of delusionment. While the classical world is associated with harmony, the classical world that Homer was representing in his poem Iliad, it is full of harmony, beauty, and order. But the world that Auden is depicting in the poem, it is fragmented, it is violent, and it is spiritually empty. People are having no purpose, they have no identity, they have no empathy, they have no emotions. So a dominant theme is dehumanization. What is the dominant theme in the poem? Dehumanize. We are no longer humans, because what is the distinctive characteristic of a human being? The distinctive characteristic of a human being is to have emotions and feelings. So if we are devoid of the emotions and feelings towards the other uh, creature or the other human, then we have completely become dehumanized. We are no longer humans, where individuals are losing their identity. So the faceless soldiers, they are symbolic of the loss of identity and became part of a mechanical system. We have rather become a part of a mechanical system. We are working in a very mechanical manner. We have transformed into a machine, and that is why we are not able to see the emotions and feelings of the other people, and we are having no say of our own. We have no identity of our own, because we are merely a machine. So the poem also emphasizes moral emptiness and the absence of ethical values. The poem is also reflective of the emptiness, the moral emptiness with which the modern man is going through, and the absence of any ethical values, particularly in scenes where violence is witnessed without protest or empathy. Right? So the depiction of violence where nobody is basically questioning, nobody is protesting against this idea. This shows that people have lose their empathy. Another significant theme is emotional numbness or indifference. So another significant theme in the poem is that of emotional numbness. You have become indifferent towards the emotion of other persons, where human beings no longer react to suffering. Right, it is a situation where human beings no longer react to the situations of suffering, indicating a deep psychological and moral crisis, which indicate a very deep and psychological moral crisis. It depicts a crisis in relation to morality. People have lost their morality. They do not know what is ethical. They do not know what emotions are. They do not know what empathy is. The poem also reflect on the brutality of modern civilization, possibly shaped by the experience of world wars. So they are also talking about the brutality, right? The harshness of modern civilization. And this harshness is something that is not natural. It is coming because of all the things that human race has experienced during the wars, the two world war, where violence become normalized. Because see, uh, if we talk about violence, it is something that has become normalized because of the wars. Because, for example, let us take an example of a person who has witnessed both the wars, World War One and World War Two. So the level of destruction that they have seen in front of their eyes is something which is very huge. So they have become accustomed to that kind of destruction. So this is something which is not abnormal for them, and that is one of the reason that violence for them is normal now. It has become a part of normal life because they have seen these things to such a great extent. And that is why whatever kind of fragmented identities and isolated individuality that the modern man is having, it is because of the situation that the human race has gone through in the two world wars, right? So at the same time, there is an implicit critique of the failure of progress. So it is also critiquing the idea of failure of progress, suggesting that technology or societal advancement has not led to moral or spiritual growth. So this poem is also reflective of the idea that mere technological or societal advancement does not mean that there has been spiritual or moral growth in terms of humans. Through these themes, Auden presents a bleak vision of humanity. Right? It is presenting a futile, bleak, empty, and vain vision of humanity, disconnected from emotion, compassion, passion, purpose, and meaning in life. Right? Even in the last point, we can see that the modern age is all about anxiety. You cannot have a proper meaning. In the similar manner, it is disconnected from compassion, purpose, and meaning. So Auden poem is striking example of how classical myth can be reinterpreted in the modern realities. So the poem that Auden has written, it is a classical and striking example of how the classical myths which were used in the earlier time can be reinterpreted. It can be remodified in order to represent the situation of the modern realities. So by deliberately contrasting Thetis' expectation with the harsh images of the shield, so he's contrasting Thetis' expectation of the world with the reality, with the harsh images of the shield. He creates a powerful sense of irony. What is irony? Irony is a literary device where whatever we have expected is subverted and we see a completely different reality. So whatever we have thought in our mind will happen is not happening, and completely opposite of that is happening, as in the case of Thetis. Because Thetis was thinking that there will be scenes of harmony, there will be scenes of civilization, there will be scenes of growing crops, but it was completely opposite of it. There was barren land, there were faceless soldiers, there was violence, destruction. So this is irony, when you are thinking something will happen and the complete opposite of that is happening. So he's using contrast, he's using irony to depict the modern world situation. So the structure of the poem alternates between the idealized vision. So the structure of the poem is switching between the idealized vision that Thetis hopes to see and the grim reality, the harsh reality, what is actually depicted on the shield. So reinforcing the gap between past ideal and present condition, right? So this contrast is helping us in understanding the gap between the past ideals and the present reality. So the imagery is deliberately stark and unsettling, using minimalistic descriptions such as bare, plain, and faceless. So the imagery, what is imagery? Imagery is a literary device where the poet uses some terms, and while reading that term, we get a visual representation of that particular thing. So bare. So when we are saying bare, there is a barren field that is coming in our view. So we are having a visual representation. Faceless, to evoke a sense of emptiness and alienation. So these are the imageries that the poet is using in order to evoke a sense of emptiness, a sense of alienation and isolation. The absence of individuality which was depicted in the emotion in the faceless soldiers and emotional response, they highlight the mechanized and impersonal nature, right? So the lack of emotional response, the lack of empathy, it is also representing the mechanized world. It is also reflecting the uh, advancement of technology, but on the uh, basic but while compromising the morals. So Thetis functions symbolically as the voice of tradition. So Thetis, the mother of Achilles, she is symbolically presented as a voice of tradition, as a voice of past. She's also symbolic of motherhood and moral expectation. Her shock represent the collapse of those values in the contemporary world. The shock that she is getting after seeing the reality is depicting the collapse of the values in the contemporary time. Audience language is controlled yet evocative, avoiding excessive ornamentation. So Auden is avoiding any ornamentation or excessive use of the literary devices so that it can remain accessible. The poem can also be read as a critique of modern political system, right? So the poem can also be read in relation with the critique of the modern political system, right? So it can be understood, it can be read in terms of the collapse of the modern political system. It can be understood in relation to the failure of the modern political system and warfare, where human beings are reduced to numbers and violence becomes routine. Right? Because in the present time, what is happening? Human beings are no longer humans. They have been reduced to numbers. For example, whenever there is a news of a bomb blast or maybe an accident, 3 people died, 10 people died. So this is how people have turned into numbers, and the violence have become very normalized. It has become a routine part of our life, because of which we are not able to feel the same kind of emotion towards these things. Ultimately, W.H. Auden presents a deeply pessimistic vision. He is presenting a completely hopeless vision in which the heroic idols of the past have been replaced by a world marked by indifference, right? So the earlier idealistic situation of the of the time of Homer has been replaced by a world which is full of indifference. People are not having any emotions, they are not feeling anything. There is cruelty, there is violence, there is moral disintegration. There are no morals that people are following, compelling readers to confront the unsettling truth of modern existence, right? So he's trying to compel the readers to come in terms with the unsettling truth about the modern existence of humans. Next is unit number 11, which deals with Robert Browning, introduction, themes, styles, and characteristics of Browning's writing. So, Robert Browning was one of the most significant poets of the Victorian age, known for his innovative approach. So, Robert Browning, he is one of the most famous and a prominent poet of the Victorian age. Victorian age is the time in the literary era when Queen Victoria was ruling England, and that is why it is termed as the Victorian age. So Robert Browning, he was born in 1819 in England. Browning developed a unique poetic voice that moved from the lyrical and descriptive style of his contemporary. So he has developed a different literary form which differ from the lyrical as well as descriptive style that his contemporaries were following. It was more dramatic and analytical. He is specifically famous for his use of dramatic monologue. What is a dramatic monologue? It is a form of it is a form of literary interpretation in which a single speaker reveals his or her character through speech. So, what is a dramatic monologue? There is a single speaker who is giving a speech and he is revealing his or her character through that speech. So his poetry often explores the complexities of human nature, moral dilemmas, and the dark aspects of the mind, making him a pioneer in psychological realism in literature. Right? Since he was talking about the darker aspects of human mind, he is also considered to be a very important writer in the realm of psychological realism. Now, the themes that in Browning's poetry are wide ranging but consistently center on exploration of human motives, the inner conflict. He frequently deals with themes of love, power, jealousy, art, morality, right? Themes of love, power, jealousy, art, morality. These are the recurring themes. In poems like My Last Duchess, he examines the abuse of power and the possessiveness inherent in relationship. He's examining the abuse of power and also that how possessiveness is inherent in relationships. His works often highlight the duality of human nature. His work is also reflective of the duality of human nature, where beauty coexists with cruelty and virtue with vice. Another recurring theme is the relationship between art and life. How art is a way of reflecting life, where art becomes a medium to reflect control, immortality, and self expression. Browning also shows a keen interest in moral ambiguity, presenting characters who are neither entirely good nor evil but deeply complex. He is also famous for depiction of gray characters, characters who are not completely good nor completely evil. They are gray. They have a deeply complex characteristics. Now, stylistically, Browning's poetry is marked by its dramatic quality and intellectual depth. His use of dramatic monologue is allowing the readers to access the inner thoughts, whatever is going in the mind of the character. So, with the use of dramatic monologue, he is basically helping us in understanding the inner psyche of the characters, while also recognizing the gap between what the speakers say and what is actually true. He's also recognizing the gap between what the speaker is trying to portray and what is actually the reality, creating powerful dramatic irony, right? So he's using this literary tool of dramatic irony because the speaker is saying something but he is meaning something else. So this language is often colloquial. What is colloquial? Everyday, day-to-day language, which is very conversational in nature. So he's making use of colloquial as well as conversational style of writing, which adds realism to his characters. Since he is using very day-to-day and ordinary language, it adds a touch of realism to his characters. Though at times it can be dense and challenging, Browning avoids ornate description. Browning usually avoids ornate description. Basically, he's avoiding excessive use of literary devices. He is trying to make it more conversational and accessible to the readers. Right? So his poems are often set in historical or Renaissance settings. So what is the settings of his poem? Historical or during the Renaissance period. Yet they address universal human concerns. Among the key characteristics of his writing are strong characterization based in realism, psychological insights, dramatic irony, and a focus on subjective experiences of individual. Strong characterization, psychological insights, irony, and a focus on the subjective experience of the individuals. Through these features, Robert Browning establishes himself as a major force in Victorian poetry, influencing later development in modernist and dramatic literature. Now let us move to unit 12, which deals with My Last Duchess. So My Last Duchess, it is a dramatic monologue in which the Duke of Ferrara, he is the speaker and he is basically telling us about his situation. So it is a dramatic monologue in which Duke of Ferrara speaks to an emissary who has come to arrange his next marriage, right? So Duke of Ferrara is speaking to an emissary. So he is a person who has come to arrange his next marriage because his earlier wife had already died. So here it is a dramatic monologue where only one single speaker is there who's speaking. There is another person who's listening, but there is no feedback from that person. So as he shows a portrait of his late wife, right? So this person has come to arrange next marriage because his earlier wife, the Duchess, has died. The Duke gradually reveals details about her character. So showing a portrait to the emissary, the Duke is also talking about the characteristics that the Duchess was having and the relationship that the Duke was sharing with her. He describes her as overly friendly and easily pleased. So what is he saying? That she was very over friendly with everybody and she was easily pleased, suggesting that she did not reserve her smile exclusively for him. He's saying that her smiles were not only reserved for the Duke, she used to give those smiles to everyone. This perceived lack of exclusivity offends his sense of pride. So because he was considering the Duchess to remain exclusive to him, the smile should only be for him, and she was not of that kind. She was very generous and she was giving smile to everyone. So that is why he is basically critiquing the lack of exclusivity that she was having. Although he never directly admits it, the Duke implies that he had her killed. I gave commands, then all smiles stops together. So he's never accepting that he has commanded the death of the Duchess, but indirectly he's saying, I gave commands and then all smiles stopped together. So by this particular statement, we can assume that he has ordered the killing of the Duchess because she was over friendly with people. So by the end of the poem, he calmly shifts the conversation back to the marriage negotiation. So by the ending of the poem, he goes back to the primary concern, that is the marriage negotiation, revealing his cold and calculative nature, which is also depictive of his cold and opportunistic as well as calculative nature. The poem closes with the Duke pointing out another artwork symbolizing his desire for control and possession, right? So there was a horse taming, there was Neptune taming the horse. The another artwork that he point out in the end of the poem is that of a Neptune taming a seahorse, right? Neptune is taming a seahorse. This is the another artwork that he is depicting in the end of the poem, which symbolizes that he likes control and possession. He wants control over people as well as objects. Now, the poem is a masterful example of Browning's use of the dramatic monologue, where the speaker unintentionally reveals his own true character. The Duke emerges as a proud, authoritarian, and morally corrupt figure who values control over genuine human connections. Right? So he's depicted as an arrogant, as a selfish, as authoritarian, and morally corrupt figure who is valuing control over genuine human relationships. His obsession with power is evident in the way he treats the Duchess as an object, first as a wife to be controlled, and later as a painting to be displayed. The dramatic irony lies in the fact that while the Duke attempts to justify his action, he actually exposes his cruelty and insecurity to the reader. So themes of power, jealousy, control, they dominate the poem. The Duke's jealousy is not rooted in infidelity, but in his ability to tolerate Duchess' independent and joyful nature. Right? So the jealousy that is coming up in the poem is not because the Duchess was disloyal. It is not because of the disloyalty. It is because of his intolerable nature towards her independence, that how she can smile in front of people, how can she take her own decision. So he was not able to tolerate that kind of independent nature and the joyful nature of the Duchess, and that is why he was pissed off, he was jealous. So Browning also critiques the objectification of women in the patriarchal mindset of the Renaissance aristocracy. The use of art as a symbol is significant. The portrait represents Duke's desire to freeze and possess beauty, reducing a living person to a controllable object. Right. So the portrait as well as the other art object where Neptune was taming a seahorse, both of them are representative of how the Duke was very much obsessed with the idea of power and control. He wants to have control over every object, and he treats humans as objects as well. Now, stylistically, the poem is written in rhymed couplets, two lines which are rhyming in nature. But Browning uses enjambment. What is enjambment? Enjambment are running lines. The line is not having any punctuation. For example, there is no full stop or comma, and it is running, right? So it joins with the another line. So the running lines are called enjambment, and he's making use of conversational tone to make the speech feel natural and fluid. So he's making use of colloquial conversational tone so that the conversation feels very natural and fluid. This technique mirrors the Duke attempt to appear composed while subtly revealing his darker impulses. So this technique of dramatic monologue is also helping us in exposing the true nature of the Duke. Overall, My Last Duchess is a powerful psychological study that exposes the dangers of unchecked authority and the complexity of human ego, making it one of Browning's most celebrated works. Now, let us discuss the questions from this particular session. Right, so whatever we have discussed in this lecture, we'll be discussing the MCQs based on it right now, so that you people can understand how well you have grasped the ideas that we have discussed in the lecture. Right, so the ending of the poem is best described as, it is described as ambiguous as well as reflective. So Thetis is shocked because the shield shows a bleak and dehumanized world. Okay, Browning is most famous for his use of dramatic monologue, where there is a single speaker giving a speech with which we get to understand his true nature with the use of dramatic irony. So the Duke's statement, "I gave command, then all smiles stopped together," it is implying that he arranged for the death of the Duchess. So the study of the Age of Anxiety, Shield of Achilles, and poetry of Browning, particularly The Last Duchess, they reveal the revolving concerns of poetry across different literary periods. While Auden captures the fragmented, anxious, and morally uncertain condition of the modern life, Browning delves into the complexity of human psychology, power, and moral ambiguity within a dramatic framework. Auden's work highlight the delusionment and spiritual emptiness of the modern world, presenting a world marked by alienation, violence, and the search for meaning. In contrast, Browning's poetry focuses on individual consciousness, using dramatic monologue to expose the hidden motives and darker impulses of human nature. Despite their differences in context and the style, both poet emphasizes the instability of human values and the difficulty of achieving moral clarity. Together, these works demonstrate how poetry serves not only as an artistic expression but also a profound medium for exploring psychological depth, societal critique, and existential concerns, ultimately encouraging readers to reflect on the complexities of human experiences. So, thank you so much for joining in. I hope whatever we have discussed in this lecture is clear to you. But if you have any queries related to whatever we have discussed in this lecture, you can jot down those queries and you can again ask me in the next lecture. Okay, so thank you so much for joining in. We'll be meeting again in the next lecture. Till then, just keep on reading things, and you can also read the entire poem, My Last Duchess, so that you can have a better understanding of these ideas. It is not a very long poem, right? It is a very interesting and a good poem. You will feel good after reading it. So thank you so much, and we'll be meeting again.